This is start of week number 3, day 4 for both of these classes. It's Monday, 28th. We had a weather delay, so Net 225 didn't meet. We only had a couple students make it to Cis-332 database and SQL, but we went ahead and went through these things today. We're going to wait and do change. We'll do that on Wednesday if we have classes, depending on the weather. But we did talk about designing information and communications technology systems, or information systems. More briefly, the students that were here did the practice 1. Those that weren't in class, you can do that practice 1 on your own. And then we talked about design. First, we reviewed some course items. Unit 1, the intro course, we talked a little bit about that. And we talked and looked at the outline materials. People need to be filling in their outlines, and they need to check and make sure their outline are set so other students can comment on it. Talk a little bit about doing the work and learning. Tech Club, we met today, and we're going to meet again. We're going to meet again on Wednesday, and we said 12:15. Let me write that up there again. So we plan on Cyber Defense Tech Club. Meet Wednesday at 12:15. Alright, so let's keep moving here. You can now log in on Work Server 1, and this would be public address would be, well, you can't use the public address, that's right. You gotta log in, if you're going to use a public one, you gotta log in the Work Server 2 and then SSH to this one. But now you have your own user information there. You can go MySQL-U for user, and then last name, first initial, middle initial, P, and then when you enter that, it's going to ask for a password, and here's the password. And you should have pretty good privileges, almost all privileges, to the databases there. So you can test that out from home when you do the practice 1. Now remember, can't log directly into here, so you would log into, if I was to give an example, 207.165, 226, 185, and then from there you can SSH there. Next step. Unit 1, we have that overall view of databases, a lot of terms. So make sure that you are working on your outline for the course. It looks like most everybody has it started, but some people have it, the first unit all done, some still have a ways to go. We use Code Academy to get started with some basic SQL. And in that first unit we talked about all the steps from creating a web presence or an app all the way down to storing the information on some storage device. Unit 2, we're going to talk a lot more about SQL fundamentals. The first assignment, talk a little bit about why SQL. And remember, part of the reason, you can write PHP to perform the commands. We'll talk more about it as we go along. Make sure you go through all of the module information for Unit 2. Start at the top and read through all of it. First assignment, we're going to explain that more towards the end, well, at the end of the session here. We talked a lot about design today, and first of all, let's do this here. Let's do a little review. We have these external views. We didn't maybe call it exactly that, but we use browser or apps to communicate with the databases. We don't even think about it with the databases. And we talked about web design, user interface, and user experience. Okay? Now if we go down here, we have a storage area where we're actually storing the data. What stores the data in there is the MySQL, so we can write the data in, get the data back out. Make sense? How do we do that? We use MySQL commands, and then we can use PHP to actually write that. What's in the middle here has a lot to do with our design. Internally, how do we look at that? We're going to be doing a lot of drawing tables and then building relationships between tables. Okay, we might have a primary key here and a foreign key here. Maybe a primary key here and a foreign key here. So our next step is to take a look at some of that design. First thing we talked about here was conceptual model. It's kind of like the business point of view. They have an idea, and we looked at a couple of them here. One, we looked at Airbnb. I've got a slide, we'll look a little more specifically at that. People had an idea. A couple guys could rent out their flat and make a little extra money to pay for rent. So they wrote a database and then allowed people to communicate with that database. People could put on there that they want to rent a place, and people could go in and find a place to rent. Uber kind of did the same thing. This idea of keeping track of cars and users. You didn't have to own, the people designing Uber didn't have to own the cars. The other people owned their cars and they had other people to drive. All they had to do was manage the data to line up the passenger with the person in the vehicle. So they had this conceptual view. Those conceptual views then worked into what we call as a logical model. Conceptual model into a logical model, or how we view it. Okay? Oops, let me... yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that. View, how we view it. Okay, so we have a logical model, and here we made these tables. Tables or entities. So Uber has drivers, so they probably keep track of all their drivers, and then they have the attributes about the drivers that define them, like the driver ID, the driver's name, maybe their license number, and the driver's vehicle ID. Now there's a lot of information you need to keep about a vehicle ID, but you don't want to keep it here because that information doesn't define the driver, but it does define, let's use another color over here, it does define the vehicle. So you have a vehicle table. And you could have a vehicle number and maybe the driver's ID to match up with the vehicle and some specific information there. And of course you have the passengers, so maybe you create a table for passengers. And we keep their information in records. Then between them you build some type of relationship between the tables. Now the ones we do in class might seem pretty straightforward or fairly easy, but this could get really complex. Especially think of something like NIAC, keeping track of all the students and what classes they're in and so forth. Finally then, we have this movement from conceptual to a logical to the physical view. We take all these tables and we actually create the tables using MySQL, which eventually then writes the information to a hard drive. So we physically make the connection. Let's talk a little more about this. Found this chart, how Airbnb got started. Can't pay rent. Joe and Brian, what do? So they think, which is a good thing to do nowadays. They think to rent out 3 air mattresses on the floor for people and serve them breakfast. I think there was like a conference or something going on in San Francisco, so they said, well gosh, we can let people sleep with us. They make a simple website, a blog with maps. 2 men, 1 woman showed up, paid $80 each. After the guests left, they thought this could be a big idea. Right, so they started in 2007. They invited a former roommate as a co-founder to help build the site. So basically they're just building the site. So they start out with a conceptual view, then they logically said this is what we'll have to keep track of, and then they could start actually building the site. Launched and had 2 bookings. Went to door, realized okay, went to New York, took photos, not growing, first funding, first money, still made $400 a week, start to grow, got rejected by a venture capitalist. Then Barry Manilow, a famous singer for you young people, drummer, rents an entire house. They say, hey, this could be an idea. Seed it, $600,000. Then Ashton Kutcher, you probably have heard of him. They raised a bunch of money. Now, 10 million validation. And what does their site do? Just keeps track. It's just a database to keep track of who has houses for rent and who wants to rent houses and exchanging the money. It isn't as difficult as you might think. So, how do they scale something like this? Right, to get to be $10 billion company, validation, how do you scale? Well, you look for other resources. For example, you store your databases on AWS or in Google Cloud, or IBM, or Azure from Microsoft, or etc., etc., etc. And then the fact we have the internet, we can make all those connections. Uber did something similar. We looked at Canvas. Canvas uses AWS to distribute. It's really, in fact, Canvas, you know, you think about distributing these things. You can create a database on a very simple Linux box to start off with, or you can use Linux from AWS. Apache's free, so you can run an Apache web server. You can manage just by how much traffic, so you're not spending a lot of money up front. Canvas is really written on an open source software. They just put it all together and sell it to colleges, and they manage the connections. Crazy. So, you can see once you're connected in, then your customer base goes it goes way up. Okay. I got a couple more. We've got this assignment 1. I got a little. So you need to get started on this. It's doing some SQL. Now notice it's on. I'll look in to see why that public address doesn't work, but it's on work server 1. So you might have to access that through 207, 165, 226, 185, and then SSH into this one. So you're going to open this document, and then these are the objectives. These are the things you should be able to do. Create tables, select data, insert data, update data, delete data. MySQL command line. Yeah, we might use a visual tool. Maybe, maybe not. But in here then, it tells you which databases to use, and it has you do a command, and then it shows you the results. Now, when you do this command, the results are going to be different because this has been accumulated over a long time. But what you'll do is you'll go ahead and do the command, and then you can put your results right here. Okay, here's another example. And so then you'll work through this document. It's fairly long, and it has information in there that leads you through how to use MySQL. After we get this one done, then there's a practice one, another assignment, and then eventually we do a skills-based assessment on your SQL abilities, and allowing you to use your notes. And that is it.